Imagine, a podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Hello again, I'm Martin Ballard, and as the year flies by, welcome to the 31st episode of this podcast series from one of the biggest producers of pantomime and children's theatre in the UK.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
I hope you've been listening to our previous 30 episodes, but a quick reminder that if you have missed any of my conversations with creatives, actors or behind-the-scenes tours of Imagine Theatre, you can catch up with them at any time because they are all still available. And don't forget to subscribe to the series so that you don't miss out on any future episodes. Now, in episode 30, we spoke to the actor, director, writer and fellow Dame, Jason Mark Williams. This time we're turning our attention to the music in pantomimes because I've been joined by the musician who's toured the world with icons like Neil Diamond, Kylie Minogue, Gary Barlow and the Supremes, keyboard player, musical director, arranger and veteran of 30 years of panto, Steve Power. How are you?
I'm good, thank you, Martin.
How did all this begin for you? Tell us a bit about where you're from, first of all, and how you got interested in music in the first place.
Okay, well, I'm from Manchester. As a child, I found the love of the piano. So from the age of 5, started piano lessons, went through school, GCSE music, did A-level music, and I was fortunate enough, my lecturers at the college were both professional musicians, work in the field of panto and summer seasons and stuff, and they kind of got me working whilst I was at college and give me proper professional jobs, you know. So kind of my journey went from there onwards from that point, really.
I mean, Manchester has produced so many fantastic musicians and bands, from the likes of 10cc, for example, and Sad Cafe, and then moving on to Oasis and Simply Red and lots of others. I mean, it really was and still is a hotbed of music, isn't it?
Yes, especially in the 80s and 90s. There's obviously quite a bit going on still today. I was kind of too young at that time. I wasn't really of adulthood when all those bands were having success.
Yeah, but a lot of those bands obviously came around specific studios, so there's always been the facility to record and get involved in music, hasn't there?
Several city centre studios. The one that you're on about before, 10cc, I think this was called Strawberry Studios. That was in Stockport. So they recorded all their stuff there.
In other areas of music as well, there's a guy called Ian Wilson who was with the band Sad Cafe. They set up a studio that later became part of Alpha Sound, Radio Jingles Company, which was all produced in Manchester. They then became agents of Jam in Dallas, who produced radio jingles and so on. And obviously that meant an involvement in all sorts of things, from film scores to adverts for television and so on. So there are so many different areas you could have gone into.
I know it was more the live theatre aspect of that I went into through working from my college lecturers, summer seasons, pantos, TV shows, theatre tours. Do you remember Paul O'Grady did Lily Savage back in the day? So he was on the circuit. We worked with him for about 3 years he had a TV show. We did about 3 stand-up tours, did a musical theatre version of Prison Cell Block H, which was a right laugh. So through my 20s, post-college, was theatre, really.
So where did the famous names come in then? Because I mentioned some of them, but there are many, many more. Tony Hadley, Rick Astley, Holly Johnson, Heather Small, right the way through to Boney M, the Weather Girls, Nick Kershaw. How did all that come about?
Well, early 2000s, I had a call from a fixer who was doing an Australian tour with an 80s kind of show. On that was Belinda Carlisle, Paul Young, Go West and Kim Wilde. And it was a 2-week tour around Australia, and they'd have like a house band who will play for all the artists on the show. So one artist will walk on, do their set, and then the next artist comes on because you've got the same band in place for the entire show. So I did that, and then there was plenty more what followed that. UK tours with different artists. There was a 70s version of it called The Best Disco in Town, where you got the 3 Degrees and Errol Brown and Candy Staton and Gloria Gaynor. So before long, doing these multiple artists 80s and 70s shows, you had accumulated quite a lot of artists who you've backed and worked with along the way for quite a few years, And then the spin-offs of that is artists like Rick Astley. He didn't have a band when he joined this arena tour we did with him. And so he used the house band that he'd worked with on that for his own solo gigs when they came in. So not only did you do these multi-artist shows, you then end up working for Rick and doing all his shows after that. Same with Kim Wilde. She used the house band for her. And I'm still with Kim now. I've been with Kim for 19 years and I've been everywhere with Kim over that time. So it was in where these artists would come in and do these shows, and then you know, before long when you look at the list of people, it's ridiculous, really.
Yeah. Well, I think just before COVID, I remember speaking to Kim and Marty Wilde because they were just about to go out on tour. I think the tour may have actually never even started, but even if it did, it probably was cut short because of COVID. Were you on that tour?
No, I think that was Marty's actual, because Marty still does touring and does gigs. And I think Kim was doing some kind of special appearances on a few of them. So it was predominantly his band. I have worked with Marty before. He has been involved in a couple of corporates or charity work we've done with Kim, and Marty's come along and we've done a couple of songs with him, which was always good fun. So no, I wasn't involved in that particular tour, but we've been touring since March this year. We've been back out with Kim. It's all been dates which have been postponed for the last 2 years. You know, they've been moved to last year and then they'll move back to this year. So hopefully this year we'll manage to do our UK tour in September, German tour in October, and the Dutch tour in, I think that's November, followed by the Swedish tour in December. So hopefully that'll all happen. You know, we're getting into the end of the year where you're unsure whether COVID's going to rear its ugly head again and things are going to start being put back. But no, for up to that point, we've got lots of festivals and stuff over the summer with Kim.
I tell you what, it's not a bad contacts book you've got there either, is it? Where you find Go West next to Howard Jones, and you know, it starts with ABC and right the way through the alphabet pretty much. Now, at the same time, you've been doing all sorts of other stuff as well, some national musical theatre tours. Talk about those in a moment's time. But when were you first aware of panto? Did you go and see panto in Manchester as a kid?
Yes, I've got very faint memories of going with my friend's mother and my friend, obviously. And we went to the Palace Theatre on Oxford Road, and I think it was Dick Whittington. It's a very faint memory, but I do remember the turn up at the theatre and all the lights of the foyer, and then the show, and the fact that people was able to shout during the show and interact with the cast and the baddie. And yeah, that's my first memory of it. And I think I went a couple of times with school on school trips, but I think that was to the Oldham Coliseum. And then obviously, as I got older, I went with my own family to watch a few here and there, but kind of didn't really pay too much attention to it until I first performed on one at the age of 17, which was at the Northern College of Music. It was like a production of Mother Goose, and that was my lecturer who was the MD. And he booked me for that, and he said, make sure when we're doing a matinee next week that you ring in sick to college. Because obviously I wasn't supposed to be doing that on his watch. You know, it's quite funny. But that was my first kind of chance at being in a pit, in a theatre, and doing that job.
I mean, obviously times have changed now. We'll talk about your role, you know, now, because there are, I guess it might be 50-50 almost, you know, with those that have live bands and those that have backing tracks, but we'll talk about that in a moment's time. But how did it feel for you then, you know, having done that as a 17-year-old, to then be doing the big musical theatre shows? Because, I mean, Little Shop of Horrors, for instance, was at the Oldham Coliseum. You were on that, weren't you?
Yes, I was at college again for that. That was another one that I had the fortune to play on. Again, the MD had come up from London. Sarah Lancashire was playing Audrey, and they needed a keys player, Hammond and everything else. So I got a call for that through the lecturers at the college, because obviously they must have reached out. I went and did that. I think it's about a 4-week run up in Oldham, and I was probably 18 at the time I did that.
I'll tell you what, it's not a bad start to a career though, is it? I
know, I was really lucky. Again, it's just down to my two lecturers from college. Yeah. Really, I don't know what the path of life would have taken if I'd gone to another college to study music. I really don't.
And then big UK tours of things like Jekyll and Hyde and Beauty and the Beast, the Disney musical, which is now on tour again and about to go back into the West End at the Palladium.
Yes.
Beauty and the Beast, such a fantastic show, isn't it?
Yeah, the biggest production kind of show I've done, where, you know, the sets are amazing, the costumes are amazing. The band I was basically playing all the strings on that show. It was the string arrangement had been condensed with like a playable keyboard, the 2-chair, triggering all live string samples on the keyboard. So it was a really busy and it was tricky part to play, really. It took a couple of weeks to learn it properly. And then when you're doing it, you're doing it, I actually met my wife on that tour. She was the swing dance captain of the tour. So I was only supposed to do it for about 3 months. And then I obviously fell in love with this girl. And I ended up there for a year, I think it was, in the end, before I left. And then a couple of years later, we got married. That was the love story.
I mean, you've hinted at something there which maybe people who go and see a show haven't thought about, and that being, it's as much a science as it is an art these days in terms of the sampling and so on. We'll talk about that in a moment's time, but what was your first professional panto job then?
The first one I did was a professional panto. The second one, the year after, I was sent to Portsmouth to do South Sea, I think the King's Theatre. Mm-hmm. And that was it's probably more of a professional one because it was proper theatre as opposed to a lecture theatre within the college. And that was called at Whittington. And I can't remember who the production company was now, but I went down there as keys 2 for that. But that was a big thing because I was 18 at the time and I had to leave home for like 5 weeks and get myself digs in a seaside town, kind of a big, bold step for someone who's so young, really, because I didn't know any of the band members neither. So I was kind of going in there fresh-faced and didn't really know much about what I was doing at the time, I'd like to probably say. But you soon learn by other people. That's the thing. You learn your trade by doing these jobs with other professional musicians around you.
It's a far cry from musical supervisor, which you were, of course, at First Family before you came to Imagine. So what sort of progression did you have from going in as a keyboard player through to musical director and then musical supervisor?
Probably a couple of years after that South Sea show, I then picked up a couple of years of MDing pantos. First off, I was in Llandudno. That was for, at the time, E&B. Mm-hmm. So my lecturers spoke to the fixer because he was asking for young MDs coming through and put me forward for it. So I did Llandudno then for 4 years, which time I moved to Milton Keynes the year after. Then I did 4 years in High Wycombe as MD, which point was 2005 now. And I'm like, I don't live in London anymore. I want to get a Manchester-based MD role. And that was the year First Family actually took over from the Kudos that it was then. Mm-hmm. They got the contract for the Manchester Opera House, so which I contacted the then supervisor, which was Chris Hatt, saying, I'd really love to do the Manchester gig because that's where I'm based and this is my CV. And he rang me up and he offered me the job, which was grand. And then I MD'd there for probably, I think it was 6 years at Manchester Opera House for First Family. And then after that season, the 6th year, I got a call from Kevin asking me if I would like to be the supervisor for the company going forward, which was a massive change for me because normally on MD roles, you'd start thinking about that in November and then you'd do the run and you'd finish in January and then you was kind of free to do it again. This taking on 10 different venues, fixing 50 musicians, writing the music and arranging clicks and the scores for 10 venues each year was a very big job and a big asset. I didn't even know I'd be able to do that from scratch. And then your year starts a lot sooner than then. You start working on it back as soon as you can possibly. You've got to fix the musicians, which is the first job, back in June, July, and then arranging music from August onwards up till the deadline, which will be November when they start rehearsals. So the first couple of years were tough. I was probably up in my studio till 4 in the morning some nights, till getting started again at 9 in the morning the next day. Loads of emails. Can we change this? Can we change that? We need this. We've changed our minds on this. And you just, the workload is intense, but the reward of going to go and watch the shows once they're up and running and listening to your work being played back and being performed on the stage is very rewarding. That was a highlight of the, to go to see them being performed. That was that really. It was a bit of a mad 5 or 6 years before First Family closed down.
The other thing that people may not realise if they come and see a panto, I suppose in many ways there are 3 different types of music. There's a fully live band, then there's a mix of maybe a smaller live band with a click track to support it, and then there's totally pre-recorded music.
Yeah.
And they're all very different, aren't they?
Yeah, well, there's a reason for a lot of that. the main thing is, last year I think I did some tracks for Imagine for, I think it was Hoxton Hall, and the reason they have no band there is there's no pit. And it's the same with the De Montfort Hall in Leicester. There is no pit there. And I think it's just sometimes it's just easier to just do tracks for the show. I was just looking through before, I did a Peter Pan in Leicester for them. And there was like 68 musical cues, you know, so you've got to cue everything. Everything has to be covered scene change wise, play-ons and play-offs on top of the actual main numbers of the songs. So there's lots to fill on these things. I know then you go to other venues where you can have your full-size band. They've got the budget for it, which also is another big main point of the musicians. It's the budget. And yeah, so the bigger the band, the better. It makes my job easier to some extent, because when we have venues where they can only maybe afford a drummer and an MD, then we need to use click tracks, which will have the bass on, for instance, because the bass is missing. But we do tend to use click tracks even with a 4-piece band setup, because there's always stuff that you need, percussion, timps and stuff, and extra vocals which enhance the ensemble singing just to beef it up. Even, you know, the big West End shows with the musicians they've got in the pit there, like 15 members, they're still using clicks just to enhance the sound as best they can, you know, make it sound as full as possible.
It's worth pointing out that for those who don't know, the click track literally means it has a click intro, which the musicians will hear in their headphones, just so that they're in time with the backing track.
Yes.
Now, I was in the Peter Pan that you talked about. The music was absolutely fantastic. I'll tell you what is the biggest nightmare for a live cast, and probably for you in terms of the music as well, is something like the 12 Days of Christmas, because it actually is stop-start all the way through, because things are choreographed to go wrong. So I mean, I have no idea how many sections of track or tracks you have to produce for that, but that must be a nightmare.
I'm just trying to find that now. 12 Days of Christmas. I do know it's got something ridiculous, because it's a stopping and starting and a pick up. Just trying to record it was a nightmare, because you'd have to go through it meticulously to see. But there was like probably 45 cues just for that one song, you know.
The song sheet can be a bit like that as well. If it's all on track, you know, it might be that you have to record it once, but then you might have to do a speeded up version or something like that. So
and a full finished version before we go into the walk down. It's unfortunate because panto, you know, it's better when it's spontaneous with an MD and a live drummer and a band. But sometimes it's not possible, and to try and put it onto track, it is. I mean, the operator must have an absolute nightmare, because he's basically he's the MD. You know what I mean? He's got to make decisions when he presses go on the machine to press play. You know, and especially with routines like that, it must be very, very difficult to get the timing right.
You can have a bit of fun with a live band as well. I'm sure you've done that as an MD. I mean, certainly with the drummer as well. The drummer can add all sorts of sound effects and percussion and have a bit of fun with it.
Yeah, just change things on a nightly basis. You know, just to keep things fresh, and the cast look forward to that, what they're going to do tonight, you know, or there'll always be a part of a show which you can always just tweak each night, just to keep things silly between the cast and the band.
So during the year, you'll presumably, maybe around now, get a list of song ideas for a particular panto. You'll then maybe have a look at the notes and write out the parts, and then would you get a band into a studio? I mean, a lot of that you might be able to play yourself on keyboards, for instance. How does it work? Okay, so we'll get the script through, and then I will make a list from the script of all the musical moments in the show, make a spreadsheet. It's probably 60-odd. They only average about 65 musical cues. They give us the songs which they want for each main bit, and then I will make an edit of these songs, cut them down for like a 4-minute, as they usually are, to like a 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes version of the song, and I'll send that back to the creative team, and then they will say, give the thumbs up, say, yeah, that's the right length, it's perfect, or they might say, can we have another chorus on the end, and I'll re-change that, and then when they get signed off, I know that's the arrangement that we're working towards for that show. And then I will arrange that then for the members of the band. What we'll do at that point, actually, once we've got the edit, that'll be sent to the choreographer as well, who might want to tweak things. Normally, they like to speed things up occasionally. So we'll get it just right, the edit, and that is it then. It's set in stone, and I will transcribe it for the band, like I say, and then work with the click track. So like we discussed before, we'll have a track of click, which only the band hear. If there's no bass player at a venue, we'll have the bass will be on track on its own little stem. We call them stems, which is like a WAV file. Then we'll have another WAV file, which might have the guitar
if it's a rock and roll song and it really needs guitar to drive it along, would have the guitar on the next track. And if there's any like brass sections, and the brass would go down a separate stem, and that would be produced and put down onto a stem as well. So then when the song is being played with the band, it will sound like there's 15 people in the orchestra, big brass section, percussionists, etc. Just before I start to commit to recording, we will tend to send the main songs out to the principals of the show just to check keys. Like when you're saying about getting a band in the studio, I kind of program everything myself using virtual instruments and stuff like that. Obviously, guitar, I will sometimes get a guitarist in and record them playing the song. Singers come in and record some backing vocals. So it's always good to make sure the key is okay for the cast members before you commit to recording the audio of guitar or backing vocals, because once they've been recorded and mixed, it's very difficult to change the key of them. You can probably get away with a semitone here or there, but if it's a couple of tones, they're going to sound either really dirgy, the vocals, or like you've hired a Mickey Mouse to come and do a session in the studio. So it's always, then you've got to do it again in some circumstances. So it's always good to try and nail the keys, make sure everyone's happy with the keys, and then we can carry on with recording the extra bits we need, which they could come. I just have my own home studio and we do all that here. I mix it all here and then we send it off to the MDs.
That shows over the 29, 30 years you've been doing it, how things have become easier in some ways, with technology and so on. But let's not forget as well, you've spoken about the singing, the songs that go through the show. We've talked about, some of the other incidental music, but then there'll be play-ons, there'll be play-offs, there'll be an overture. There'll be other music as well. So it's a massive job, and that's for not just one panto.
Well, if you do four or five, then and they're normally always different shows. If you've got two Cinderellas going out, then there's a good chance that the majority of the music, like Cinderella's entrance or the fairy entrance, will be the same in both places. But depending on the cast and the casting of each show, the show could be completely different. 80% different music to the other production, which is the same story, basically, which is a shame, because it'd be nice just to do a mirror image of a show, but it's never as simple as that.
And what about COVID-19? How much of an impact did that have on you, not just for the panto, but everything else you do?
Well, everything just stopped for me. First of all, it was funny because it first got, we're going to lose these shows in April and May and June, but July ones are still on, and then as time went on, you get the phone call, all the July and August is off now. It's kind of drip-fed to me. I didn't really know it'd be 18 months without any work. You just thought, oh, well, the September stuff's still looking like it's in the diary, And then it's like, well, it's all been moved to next year, and next year came, and then you think, oh, right, well, we'll be okay for January, and it kind of just got all moved back again. If I would have been told in that March of 2020 that it was going to be exactly a year and a half until you're going to be doing any shows again, I may have probably had a career change at that point, because I would have known this length of time there would have been out of work for, just because it was kind of drip fed and moved down the diary by a couple of months and thinking, oh, we'll be okay. It kind of just kept you longing for that to come about, and it never did. So it was a real tough time just for not having anything to do, nothing to get out of bed for most mornings, because there was just no work. But I knew everyone was in the same position. So after a couple of months, I kind of eased my anxiety about that, because everybody who was in the music business or dancing or singing or actors, they was all kind of in the same boat.
So what was it like last Christmas then to be back?
It was really good to be in a theatre, performing in front of audience members again who were enjoying themselves. I found it was a little bit strange because there were still restrictions in place. Mm-hmm. I was based in Wales last year in Llandudno, and one day they walk in saying we don't need to wear masks today because we're all in a bubble, and the next day we changed our minds. Everyone's got to wear masks now. It makes a bit of a sterile environment. No one really hung out with each other much because we was all trying to be careful and not catch anything or spread it to other cast members. So it was great to be. I mean, I had MD a show for 10 years at this point because I've been a supervisor for First Family, and then I've been arranging for Imagine for the last 4 or 5 years. So taking the MD job it was great to be back in the pit again. As I say, it was just the background of it all, just having to be careful, because normally Panto was a really fun time and it's a social time for the cast and everyone involved, and it was we barely saw each other outside of the theatre. Well,
especially because you closed on Christmas Eve as well.
We did. So we got the news that they changed the rules in Wales, and we got the news about 4 days before, like we'll finish on Christmas Eve, and that'll be it. So, you know, it's a shame because we'd gotten so far, got this great show on. The audience members were loving it. It was getting great reviews. And then we had to cut it short, which was a real shame. Because that week, Christmas up to New Year, you know, it's normally a good busy week, that, because everyone's off work and you've got families, it's full, you know. And it's a shame because once you've sold a theatre on a non-social distancing kind of setup and then you've got to social distance, it's impossible. You've just got to say, close the show.
Well, we keep our fingers crossed that there's no interruption this year. Everybody's really looking forward to it again. Before we finish, I've got to ask you, after 30 years or so of doing panto and seeing panto as a child, what's your favourite panto, Steve?
My favourite panto it's got to be Cinderella for me. I love the story. I love the magic of it. I'm just very familiar with the way the storyline goes as well. I think I've probably done more Cinderellas in my time as MD than I have other shows. I love the horse moment at the end. Yeah, for me, definitely Cinderella.
And the scope for music is excellent in that as well, because Buttons can have a comedy song, a patter song or something maybe.
Or the Friends song with Cinderella.
The Uglies can have a comedy song. Then you've got, you know, that magical music for the transformation pumpkin into the coach, all that. I mean, it's got everything, isn't it?
And the leaving of the ballroom scene in the second half, the low moment when she's, you know, out in the woods on her own, and the festival dance, big celebration thing, the ballroom, obviously it's a great opportunity to stick great songs in there for the when she goes to the ball and they have the dance stuff. So there's a couple of duets we can throw in there. It's my favourite glitzy one of them all. I love the story as well. Well,
listen, I hope the panto season goes well for you again. I know you've got a busy year ahead with the number of pantos that you're working on. In the meantime, Steve, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you, Martin. Love to speak to you.
And I'm afraid that's about it for another episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the series to catch up with any episodes you've missed so far, and make sure you don't miss any future episodes. Also, join me next time when I'll be talking once again to one of the UK's leading experts on British pantomime. He is Senior Curator of Modern and Contemporary Theatre and Performance at the Victoria and Albert Museum. Simon Sladen joins me next time for the next episode of Just Imagine.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.